We've been working with the Statistician General, Stats SA, also with the Finance and Fiscal Commission, but there are many stakeholders. The Progressive Women's Movement of South Africa, that is almost having the same role that the Women's Coalition played then when they started with the Women's Charter. Now, to make sure that women across the political spectrum is being mobilized and making sure that they also participate in this process. So in actual fact, the Women's Charter brought us to a place where women could speak up for themselves, and that women could say nothing about us without us. And that we tried, and we in some way mixed success with that in involving the LGBTIQA+, plus because they are also people that are feeling they are neglected and no one are looking at their issues and so on. But what I really must emphasize is that in terms of socio-economic circumstances, women are still very left behind. And when they say those that are not being touched, in many instances, women in the rural areas, and there is opportunities, but the other weakness that we have as South Africa is in the way we communicate issues to people. And I think more can be done to make sure that the message go out, that there is a lot that have been happening, there is a lot of change that have taken place, but how do you make sure it is all-encompassing and is inclusive within South Africa?
And ma'am, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned the inclusion of women in rural areas in particular, because as we have indicated, they are always, in many instances, they are left behind. I'm also glad to hear that even though you had visited the Western Cape, but you are intending to come and visit the Western Cape again, with a particular focus on the rural Western Cape. You've mentioned some of your key stakeholders, and you'd also remember that the President recently announced a fund for gender-based violence. How did you receive those news as someone who's responsible for review of this Women's Charter?
What is exciting about the issue of the fund that the President has launched is the involvement of the private sector. It is very exciting because in many instances, when you listen to women, the challenges that they experience is the issue that they don't know where to go, they don't know who can assist them, and if the NGOs and those that are responsible to make sure within communities that women are getting access to services, access to police station, access to health services and so on, if they can be able to have kind of support, because many of the women said, I started my own NGO here, I started my own civil society movement, but I don't know where to go to get assistance so that I can take it forward in my community and so on. So if this fund is intended to assist those that are rendering services, we are very excited, and we really hope that the resources will go to those that need it the most and that will be able to benefit the most from that resources.
And yet, parliamentary were also excited when the President made that announcement. Lastly, ma'am, if you can just share with our viewers at home your expectations now from the President's address happening in the next hour. What is it that you expect to hear from President, especially being someone that has been given this huge role to play?
We know for a fact that the President will be saying something about the issues around the pandemic, around COVID-19, and also what is more important is the fact that we will want to hear more about the issue of the economic recovery of the country, because we know in wars, those that will suffer the most is the women and the children. If there is a dip in the economy, those that will suffer the most of poverty and other things is the women and the children. So for me, it's more important that we will hear more as to how we are going to make sure that we address the issues around the economy so that we can assist people that are living in poverty, so that we can assist particularly those that are losing their jobs, unemployment and so on. We know that we don't want to speak about inequality because it is scientifically proven that women is the most unequal in society. So we don't want to speak about it. But if we can hear how there will be a turning point in the economy to make sure, because if you are at your lowest, you cannot go down more. The only way is upwards. And we hope that the President will tell us how will the economy and the recovery of the economy of South Africa make sure that young people, women, and particularly children and people living with disabilities will be the ones that will be benefiting from the economy, at least when we see it again begin to blossom, and also when we see again that the issues or the economy is being used to make sure that all South Africans begin to benefit from whatever is there. Because at the current moment, when you go out like we did, you find that the face of poverty is a woman, and mostly African. And that is the biggest problem that we are still experiencing. And we would really want to see that in terms of the State of the Nation address, addressing issues around the pandemic, addressing issues around whatever challenges we are experiencing, but mostly if we can see an economy that will be beneficial to all of us.
Talking about the issues of pandemic, the President and the presiding officers will be holding a candle lighting ceremony later this evening, just a few minutes before the President delivers his State of the Nation address. And we do know that we will be seeing you there. And we wish you the best of luck for the day. And thank you very much for joining us here at Parliament TV Studios.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Viewers at home, that was Ms. Sylvia Lucas, the Deputy Chairperson to the National Council of Provinces, talking to us on the review of the 1994 Women's Charter. If you want to know how you can follow us on our social media platforms, please stay tuned as we show it to you.
The 2021 SONA takes place in a year like no other. Our country is faced with many challenges aggravated by COVID-19. The future is, however, not bleak, as our country and its people are a crop of resilience and hard work. South Africa, our beloved country, will emerge victorious and strong from the challenges at hand. The presiding officers of Parliament, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Mayor Thandi Modise, and the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Ray Amos Masondo, have, in answering the call of a joint sitting of Parliament for the presentation of the State of the Nation address, called a hybrid sitting of this important occasion in the calendar of the state activities in our country. The hybrid SONA 2021 will take place on the 11th of February 2021 at 7 p.m. Follow all events on Parliament TV channel 408 and social media platforms for further updates, as well as witnessing the President delivering the speech to the nation. Parliament, following up on our commitment to the people, making your future work better.
This book, our Constitution, protects our society and empowers us to govern. The protea leaves are us, the people, who freely elect our voices in Parliament. The drum calls the people of Parliament, through whom we govern together. And the sun is our country, healing our past, improving our lives, and energizing our potential. Together, our Constitution, our people, our Parliament, and our country are building our great South African nation. Parliament TV, channel 408 on DSTV.
2 or 3? I'm on camera.
Good afternoon and welcome back again to Parliament TV Studios. I am now joined by my co-presenter, Shihlamari Songobeni, who will be reflecting on what we have been doing during the course of today. Shi, welcome.
Thank you very much,
once again.
Tembinkosi. Indeed, it's been a very interesting day. We've had a lot of activities, a whole lot of interviews building up to the great moment where the President will be delivering his State of the Nation address later on. Indeed, there's still a lot coming up this afternoon or this evening as we approach the big moment, and we will see the President and the presiding officers leading the candle lighting ceremony where they will be honoring the victims of COVID-19. We have lost so many people, so many lives have been lost to the pandemic. But also, we'll also continue, Teminkosi, looking at, reflecting on the expectations of the public and also the expectations of different political parties that are represented here in Parliament. So there's still more that we will still be looking forward to.
And I am aware that Parliament has been out there, Parliament TV has been out there and speaking to some of our viewers about the expectations which you just mentioned relating to SONA. And it has been a very busy day. Even though it's quiet outside the precinct, it's not as busy as it would be on a normal State of the Nation address day. But as our viewers would be aware that this one is slightly different. True. Because it's happening when the country is faced with this COVID-19 pandemic.
Very true. Indeed, it's a very difficult time in our country, and this State of the Nation is being delivered under very difficult circumstances. But now, the State of the Nation is delivered in the National Assembly, and it's through the joint sitting that is organized by Parliament. And this joint sitting is governed by many different rules. And we've had a lot of discussions with the Speaker of the National Assembly giving us a lowdown of how these rules are going to apply in tonight's sitting. We've also had time to chat and talk to both secretaries of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, guiding us on the rules that will apply. Let's take a look at that conversation that we've had with them.
The first democratic parliament of the Republic of South Africa inherited a compendium of the Westminster traditions and customs of conduct, engagement that govern the decorum, as well as the debates of the Houses of Parliament. These traditions and customs are a prescription of what verbal and non-verbal languages are permissible in the Houses of Parliament, the National Assembly, and the National Council of Provinces, many of which are now the anatomy of its rule book. Joining us in the studio today ahead of the State of the Nation address this evening are the Secretary of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces Secretary, in order to deal with the rules as well as the management of the business of Parliament. These are the gentlemen that you will see draped in the black cloaks, and they are usually found in the table below the presiding officers. Gentlemen, welcome to the studio of Parliament Television. We are having, of course, the National Assembly Secretary, Mr. Masibulele Kaso, and the National Council of Provinces House Secretary, Advocate Mudivedi Pindela. Perhaps we need to start from where we ought to start. What are your responsibilities? I suppose the viewers at home would want to understand that first and foremost. Do you want to go first, Mr. Klaso?
Thank you. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers at home. Our role, we are chief advisors on issues of procedure. In the House, we manage the business of the House, whether it is in terms of the secretarial services of the House, and the House is adequately prepared for members and to ensure that Parliament is able to carry out its mandate within the constitutional prescripts.
Because normally when viewers at home are watching the proceedings in the House, they will see you sometimes standing up and going to whisper in the ear of the presiding officer. What would you be normally saying?
Well, we would be pointing out maybe a particular rule or just alerting the presiding officer to something that the presiding officer might not have observed in the House. But ours is really there to assist the presiding officer. Ultimately, it is the presiding officer who runs the House, who runs the business of the House, who gives the rulings, who directs the House in the manner it should conduct its business. But ours is just to ensure that from the point of view of the rules, point of view of the law, point of view of the Constitution, the presiding officer is assisted to be able to conduct the business of the House and to enable members of Parliament to conduct the business of the House correctly and in terms of whatever law is applicable in that instance.
So you will not be whispering any state secret in the ear of the presiding officer?
Won't be whispering what?
State secrets.
No, we wouldn't. We wouldn't. Our work is pretty predictable in terms of what we base it on. It's on the rules. It's nothing secret.
No, that was on a lighter note. Advocate Pindela, are these roles the same in both houses in the National Assembly? Are they the same as will be in the National, will be the same as in the other house?
We've got two distinct houses, as you have pointed out, the National Council of Provinces and the National Assembly, and that's what we refer to as Parliament. I just want to point out that in most instances you find that people refer to one house as Parliament, whereas in terms of the Constitution, Parliament consists of these two houses, the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. These two houses have got their own distinct rules. In fact, we have three types of rules. We have the rules that are applicable to the National Assembly when it is sitting alone. Then we have the rules that are applicable to the National Council of Provinces when it is sitting alone. Then we have the joint rules that are applicable to the two houses when they are sitting together in a joint sitting like the State of the Nation address. So these rules apply differently in the two houses, but they have similar features. For instance, the rules of debate, you would find that the rules of debate in the National Council of Provinces are similar to the rules of debate in the National Assembly. There are other rules, of course, which are distinctly applicable to the National Council of Provinces. For instance, if you're dealing with matters relating to provincial matters, those are rules that are distinctly applicable to the National Council of Provinces, which are not necessarily applicable to the National Assembly. Although the rules also would relate to the quorum in the two houses, but you would find that the rules, the quorum in the two houses is not necessarily the same. That also goes to the rules applicable to committees of the two houses. The rules of the National Council of Provinces are applicable to the committees of the National Council of Provinces committees, and the committees of the National Council of Provinces are referred to as select committees, whereas in the National Assembly the committees are referred to as portfolio committees. Equally so insofar as the joint committees are concerned, those would be committees that consist of members from the two houses. We apply joint rules relating to joint committees.
Perhaps somebody watching at home the proceedings of Parliament can just say, but why do we really need the rules? I mean, these are very important public representatives. They know what needs to be done. So the question will be, do we really need the rules in order to govern the administration or the proceedings of the House?
Yes, we do. We do, because there must be an element of predictability in terms of how Parliament conducts its business. Apart from the fact that the Constitution provides that Parliament must have put in place rules and orders to conduct its business. And therefore you need the rules to regulate business. You need the rules. For instance, the Constitution says members of Parliament have freedom of speech and they cannot be arrested for what they say or what they produce in the House. And it's only subject to what the rules say. So for instance, the rules will then make provision for debate, how debate must be conducted in the House, what constitutes appropriate speech, what is in line with the decorum of the House, the way things are done. The rules will regulate even the decision making, take it to the level of a House, how the House regulates that business. So the Constitution has given Parliament the space to regulate its business. But for me, the key thing that is important is that the manner in which Parliament conducts its business must be predictable, but also it must always be in terms of the Constitution. So the rules are not there and this is how I put it, it's not a package of do's and don'ts, but the rules are there to enable members of parliament to carry out their constitutional mandate. And if the rules can be viewed in that manner, then everyone will understand why we must have the rules. But they will tell you how you hold the executive accountable, how you raise issues that you wish to raise within the House, how you raise issues against other members in the House. So that's why you have the rules. And so they are important. They regulate business.
And I think what is also important regarding the importance of the rules is that they are also provided for in the Constitution. The Constitution actually enjoins Parliament to create its rules in order to govern its business. Do you want to say something about that, Advocate?
Yeah, indeed so. When I make presentation on the rules, my question is normally, imagine if there were no rules for the roads. What would happen if there were no robots, if there were no stop signs? What would happen? There would be disorder. So the rules are there to govern the proceedings of the House, to make sure that the debates are conducted or the business of the House is conducted in an orderly fashion. That even if you exercise freedom of speech, you exercise it in a particular fashion, in an orderly manner, to ensure that you don't defame other members, you don't use language that we call unparliamentary language. So the rules are very important to ensure that the business of the House runs smoothly, and that the presiding officers are able to conduct the business and direct the business of the House in a orderly fashion. Yeah.
And then there is an issue also that it's not only the written rules that are in the booklets that actually are used to run the business of the House. There are conventions, there are traditions, etc. Do you want to perhaps just to expand on that?
Yes, I think as you indicated when we started, we have what we call unwritten rules. These are rules which are not necessarily contained in the rule books, but which also govern the proceedings of the House. For instance, we have what we refer to as unparliamentary language. It's not stated clearly in the rules as to what constitutes unparliamentary language, but we have a compendium, for instance, of what constitutes unparliamentary language. The rulings from the chair, for instance, are not necessarily contained in the rules, but they form part of precedent, and that's why I'm saying sometimes if a particular phrase is used in the rules, we include that in the compendium. And the realization is that we can't have all these contained in the rules, otherwise you'll have a very bulky rule book that you will not be able to carry around.
Absolutely. Mr. Glasso, the process of creating these rules, can you just take us through?
Well, there are structures in Parliament that are charged with the responsibility to formulate rules, to process rules. Each of the houses would have a rules committee, and you would also have a subcommittee on the review of rules. Just to give an example, when the National Assembly had to review its rules, there was even in a sense, a public participation process where people were invited who had issues to raise about the rules, because in terms of the rules, the authority is derived from various sources: the Constitution, the Acts of Parliament like the Powers and Privileges Act, as my colleague has said, conventions, practices, previous rulings by presiding officers, and sometimes we would refer to rulings given in other jurisdictions. So you would have looked at all these issues. And of course, in Parliament currently, you would also have models like oversight model and all of this. I'm citing this because these are some of the reference material that were used to formulate these rules. But the rules themselves are done by members, are formulated by members. So it's a multi-party process that formulates those rules. And of course, we always have to ensure that those rules comply with the Constitution. In other words, they pass constitutional muster. So once the committees have done the work they're supposed to do in terms of rule formulation, then the rules would come before the House. They are then agreed to by the Assembly or the Council, as the case may be. And that happens, then they become the rules applicable to all members. They are binding to all members. So these are not the rules for a particular party. These are not the rules for a governing party or for an opposition party. They are rules for all, applicable to all the parties. They become the rules of Parliament, rules of the Assembly, or the rules of the Council. And therefore, members are expected to adhere to the rules. And when the presiding officers apply them, it is expected that members would observe the directives of the presiding officers. But I think I do need to state that, as my colleague has said, there are things that are not necessarily in the rules. In the context of the NA, you would have something called guidelines agreed to by the Rules Committee. Now, these would be issues, for instance, the membership of Parliament changes from Parliament to Parliament. So things that have to do with how many members are entitled to do motions, you would not want to put those in the rules, because it would mean you must amend the rules every time the composition of Parliament changes. So those will be in the guidelines that are agreed to by the Rules Committee. But they are also binding to members. Yeah.
Advocate, is the process similar to the other house, to the National Assembly in the National Council of Provinces?
Indeed, the process is the same. We do have the Rules Committee. We have the subcommittee on the review of rules. Once a rule is introduced, for instance, in the Rules Committee, it is then referred to the subcommittee for deliberation. Once the subcommittee has dealt with it and has agreed on that particular rule, then that rule is referred back to the Rules Committee for adoption. Once the Rules Committee has adopted it, then the rule goes to the House for adoption by the House. And the reason behind that is that all members must be aware of that rule, and they must take a conscious decision to adopt that rule so that they should know that that rule is binding on them. The process follows the same process also insofar as the joint rules are concerned. The joint rules, as I've indicated earlier on, you would have the joint rules committee, which consists of members from both houses, the subcommittee on joint rules, and the joint rules are adopted by the two houses.
Speaking of the issue of adherence, you are talking of the rules be binding. We often see the contestation regarding the rulings of the presiding officers on the floor of the houses. What is the procedure for challenging the rulings of the presiding officers?
I think the point to make there is that firstly, the rulings of presiding officers are binding and they are final. But members, in terms of the rules, are permitted to challenge the principle underlying the ruling. And therefore, where a member is aggrieved, the member will then write to the Speaker for that rule, the principle underlying that ruling, to be referred to the Rules Committee. Now, I'll give you one example on this issue of principle. We had an instance where members felt that the fact that they cannot, if a particular member would have been convicted of a certain act, let's say of fraud, for instance, and members felt, look, a court has pronounced on this issue. Why can't we make reference to it in the House? So that became an issue because the presiding officers would say, no, this is unparliamentary. You must come with a substantive motion. And members started saying, look, but the courts have pronounced. Why can we not speak on this issue? The matter was then referred to the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee considered the question, the principle of the matter, and the outcome was, all right, members can refer to court outcomes and court judgments, even as they refer to other members, but there must be no name calling. You can't start calling members. fraudsters. Can't start calling members whatever you want to call them, but there must be no name calling. And that when members refer to those court outcomes, they must do so accurately. So that was the principle. So I was just illustrating where this issue of principle could go. So where members are aggrieved, there is a process for that, and the rules committee will deliberate on the issue and come up with an outcome. The one other point that I would like to clarify on the issue of rules, there's something called orders. These would take different forms. For instance, where the House does not want this to be a permanent way of doing things, it could say, look, we agree that for this annual session, the time applicable for responses, let's say by the executive to statements by members, is limited to 3. So that would be an order applicable to that session. And it's binding for the duration of that session. And when the House wishes to review this, it does that. So there's an element of flexibility in terms of how the House does it. And it carries the same status as a rule for that specified period.
Advocate, is it the same process as it is followed in the National Council of Provinces?
Well, the National Council of Provinces does not have a similar rule as the rule in the National Assembly, but we do have that practice that if a member is aggrieved by a ruling of a presiding officer, a member may address that to the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces. But it does not happen very often in the National Council of Provinces that we find instances where a member is not satisfied with the ruling and addresses that to the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces. I think what one would emphasize is that the ruling of the presiding officer is final and binding. You can quibble with it, but the fact of the matter is that ultimately that ruling is final, it's binding, and you cannot disobey that ruling if you are in the House. The minute you disobey that ruling, whether it's correct or not, whether you consider it correct or incorrect as a member, but you must comply with the ruling of the presiding officer. If you do not abide by the ruling of the presiding officer, then the presiding officer must take action against you.
And these rules, they've gone through a transition. We've seen first edition, second edition, fourth edition for both the rules of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. Why is it so important for constant changes in the rules?
It's important. It's important because the rules must be in keeping with developments. I'll give you one example. We did not have a rule to deal with motions of no confidence. And there was a lot of litigation in the 4th or 5th Parliament. And there were particular court interventions or court orders around that issue. And Parliament, in its wisdom, determined that it needed to update the rules. We did not have a rule to regulate Section 194, the issue of constitutional office bearers, institutions supporting democracy. And the National Assembly, in its wisdom, felt that there was a need to close that gap. So the rules must be kept in step with current developments and be responsive to a whole range of things. For instance, a lot of what used to be conventions was not in the rules of the NA in the 3rd Parliament. But in the 4th to 5th Parliament, there was a sense because members started saying, but this is not in the rules. And the House, in its wisdom, felt, let's, to the extent possible, let's include these things. For instance, how do you refer to each other in the House? The issue of cutting the line between the person at the podium and the speaker. Those are now in the rules. And to clarify also what could constitute unparliamentary expressions. So the rules have been updated so that they can be kept in step with developments. Yeah.
Advocate, since last year, March, the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces have adopted a new way of working, which we have never seen before, what others will call the new normal, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen the new use of information technology to conduct meetings, sittings of the House. The National Council of Provinces, in particular, has been meeting completely virtually, while the National National Assembly has been meeting on hybrid sessions. Do the rules that we have known to apply to the physical sittings of committees and the Houses of Parliament, are they sufficient do they sufficiently cater for the conducting of the business in hybrid as well as completely virtual format?
Yeah, I think that shows the dynamic nature of the rules. And perhaps I should also point out that whilst we have stated that the rules govern the proceedings of the Houses, the rules can also be suspended to enable the House to carry out a particular business. And that is provided for in the rules. And in addition to that, the rules also provide for the chairperson or the speaker, whichever the case may be, to come up with a rule if the rules do not sufficiently provide for a particular situation. So that shows the nature of the dynamic nature of the rules. So the House may not sit back and say we can't carry out this business because there is no rule that provides for this particular business. So in the event that the rules do not provide for a particular situation, the Speaker or the Chairperson, depending on the House, may determine a particular rule, and that rule becomes valid until such time that the Rules Committee has decided on that particular rule, or if it's a joint rule, until the two houses have determined or have decided on that particular joint rule. But coming to the hybrid and virtual sittings of the houses, and perhaps just for clarity's sake, I should explain what do we mean by hybrid sittings and virtual sittings, because sometimes we throw these terms around without necessarily giving them content. So the hybrid sittings would be sittings where you have some members physically in the House and some members virtually in the House. The members who would be physically in the House would be here in Parliament, and those who would be virtually in the House would be connected through other platforms, either through Zoom or through Microsoft Teams, to the proceedings of the House. They are as able to participate in the proceedings and processes of the House as those that are physically in the House. The clear example would be, for instance, the coming State of the Nation address. The presiding officers have determined that it would be a hybrid sitting. So we will have some members in the House, 50 members in the House, which would be constituted, of course, by the permanent delegates and special delegates from the National Council of Provinces and members of the National Assembly. And we would have the remainder of the members logged in or connected through virtual platforms in the proceedings of the House. And for the purposes of the quorum, for instance, if any matter were to be decided, those members who are physically, the number of the members who are physically in the House and the number of the members who are virtually in the House is taken into consideration, and then you determine how many members do you have. We do that by checking the number of members who have logged into the system, and that gives us a combination of the members who are virtually in the House and those who are virtually in the House and those who are physically in the House. Virtual sittings would be sittings where you have members spread across the country without anybody physically being in the House. So they are virtually connected, they are virtually, and we call that a virtual House. They are virtually in the House. The presiding officer is sitting somewhere, members are sitting somewhere. For instance, if you take members of or delegates of the National Council of Provinces, they would be spread all over the country across all the 9 provinces. And you conduct the proceedings of the House as if you are in Cape Town. And in terms of the rules governing virtual sittings, we normally say that we take into consideration all the members who have logged into the system for the purposes of determining how many members do we have. That also goes to the voting insofar as dealing with the business of the House is concerned. So whereas members are spread all over the country, we can conduct the business of the House. And that has proved very good for the National Council of Provinces, for instance, taking into consideration that we also want special delegates who are equally members of the provincial legislatures to participate in the processes and proceedings of the House. So they don't have to travel all the way from their provinces to Cape Town. They can still attend the proceedings of the House wherever they are. So whereas coronavirus is not a good thing, but I think it has given rise to opportunities insofar as dealing with matters of the House are concerned. We have seen, of course, and I think also in the National Assembly, we have seen, of course, an increased participation of, particularly from the National Council of Provinces, increased participation of members, the special delegates from the provincial legislatures. We have seen an increased participation of ministers. We have seen an increased participation of MECs, for instance, in the processes and proceedings of the National Council of Provinces. And we have seen committees also even going into late sessions, conducting their businesses without confining members to Cape Town, without confining members to the precincts of Parliament. So the rules are as dynamic as that. They must cater for each and every situation that arises to enable the houses to conduct their businesses. So we have rules on virtual sittings, we have rules on hybrid sittings. Thank you very much.
And then lastly, perhaps with to you, Mr. Klaso, you have indicated in the beginning that there are 3 types of rules. Perhaps just to go to indicate, to mention those types of rules quickly. And then lastly, just to indicate if we are ready for this evening for the State of the Nation address, and that the rules will be sufficient to manage the business this afternoon, this evening.
Indeed. Yes, no, there are three types of rules. One governing the National Assembly, applicable only to sittings of the NA and to meetings of committees of the NA. Rules for the NCOP, applicable to the House, to the Council, and to its committees. You then have the joint rules. So for the sitting this evening, the joint rules are applicable. And it's the joint rules that regulate the convening of the sitting itself. President wrote to Parliament and called for the sitting, and the presiding officers jointly published that. And therefore the sitting has been called in terms of the joint rules, and those joint rules are applicable. Of course, supplemented with the rules for virtual hybrid sittings. And I think this is important, that the rules for virtual hybrid affirm the existing rules of Parliament, that they are applicable to this sitting. In terms of the sitting, we are ready. The rules are in place. Members will be in attendance, and the rules will remain applicable. The laws that are applicable, like your Powers and Privileges Act, remains applicable, and so the sitting will be regulated properly in terms of the rules that have been published and the rules that have always existed of Parliament. So we are ready. We are ready indeed.
There you have it, a very important discussion on the rules and how the business of the House is managed by the presiding officers. and the role of the House Secretaries. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the discussion. This is where we will end it. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon and welcome back. You are still watching the live broadcast of the 2021 State of the Nation Address, coming to you live from Parliament. Parliament of the Republic of South Africa is a democratic parliament with 14 parties represented in both houses. We took a walk and spoke to those political parties who were available to talk to Parliament TV, and this is what they had to say.
My expectation as a member of Parliament is that the President in his State of the Nation address rebuild and restore the faith of our nation after he has complained that at many levels of government, the public service and in business, looting and corruption is taking place during the 6th Parliament. This is hot on the heels of the complaint by the Deputy Chief Justice that the first 5 parliaments are guilty of very poor oversight. We expect to hear how the President is going to deal with these concerns. For researchers to continue to say that Muslim wives are whores and their children are bastards harms the dignity of my constituency, and we want to hear that the President will support my private member's bill, which will be an interim arrangement until the one statute marriage bill is passed in Parliament, which may take 5 years. Many of these Muslim wives have written to the presidency, so it must be top of their mind. The President promised in his last SONA that something will be done to address discrimination against people living on the Cape Flats because of the color of their skin. They don't get jobs, admission to study institutions, and they are now amongst the poorest communities in the country. We expect the President to now call for a commission of inquiry like the Tehran Commission during the darkest days of apartheid. The President's government has shown that they do not make the cut so far to deal with gangsterism, drugs, as well as the personal safety of South Africans in their homes, in their streets, in their neighborhoods, at their schools, at shopping malls and on farms. He has to tell the nation how this will be dealt with. Al-Jamaa will continue to open the doors of Parliament.
Inkulumo kaMengameli wezwe obeyibhekise esizweni ifike esikhathini la kunzima kakhulu eningizimu Afrika nasemhlabeni wonke jikelele, njengoba sibhekene nezingqinamba ezilethwe ezweni iCovid. UMengameli udinga bacacise kabanzi ukuthi uhlelo lomgomo ekade kuphila bese liyaqala lapha eningizimu Afrika labanjezelwa amathize nokuhluleka kwawo uhulumeni uthi alethe ukucacisa kulokho. Kodwa ngaphezulu kuningi IFP sishaya ikhwelo ukuthi isekela likaMengameli wezwe uNondavid Mabuza njengoba usihlalo wekomiti elididile longqongqoshe elibhekene nodaba lomgomo ukuthi akakhulume nesizwe naye ukuqinisekisa ukuthi lezi zinto ziyalungiseka. Kodwa ke uMengameli futhi unesibopho sokuthi akhulume kabanzi ngodaba lokuthuthukiswa komnotho nokukhula komnotho ukuze sibe nesiqiniseko sokuthi abantu bakithi bayayithola emsebenzi ngoba impilo isazoqhubeka noma lolu ubhalo lwe-COVID selidlulile. Kudinga ukuthi uMengameli akhulume kabanzi futhi ngodaba lokuletha kwey'ngqalasizinda ney'nsiza kusebenza, ikakhulukazi eqinisekiseni ukuthi ezempilo nezemfundo ziyakwazi ukuthi zimumathe umthamo wey'dingo ekudinga ukuthi iNingizimu Afrika ibhekane nazo. Siphinde simshayele-ke ikhwelo neMengameli ukuthi udaba lwenkohlakalo ukuthi usuku ngosuku okuyilona ngempela libambezele intuthuko yabantu bakithi nakakhulume kabanzi nangokujulileyo ngayo ukuqinisekisa ukuthi imali yomphakathi ifeza izidingo zomphakathi. Siyaqonda ukuthi sesikhathini esinzima sinalo ukuthi sidinga ukuthi sibambisane khona, kodwa ukubambisana kwethu kusilele ekutheni uMengameli naye akhuluma amaqiniso nokuthi asinikeze uhlelo oluphilayo noluhlakaniphile ukuthi izozolisa kanjani phambili.
Good afternoon. As the ANC Parliamentary Caucus, we are still committed on following up on our commitments and making your future work better. We believe that the State of the Nation address will focus on the following: 1, winning the battle against COVID-19. 2, our commitments to the economic recovery plan. 3, fighting crime and corruption. 4, winning the fight against gender-based violence and femicide. We think this is what will be in the President's speech. I thank you.
As African Independent Congress, we expect a lot from the President on the 11th of this month when he's delivering his State of the Nation address. Let me start off by touching on the issue of COVID-19 vaccine. The South Africans are nesting fears about this vaccine. They are very much skeptical. Others are not willing now to take it on. It's worse now when it is rumored that this vaccine will expire in April this year. We wonder therefore now, why was it taken from so far up to here, but only to expire in April? The President should give more clarity on that. And again, we expect the President now to allay these fears on the part of the South Africans. He must take us into confidence so that the people of South Africa believe that really this is going to assist them. Another issue that the President expects to touch on is the issue of GBV, gender-based violence, and femicide. Many South Africans are suffering, more especially women and children. They are dying in the hands of these criminals. So we think perhaps now there should be another strategy that should be brought about in order to deal with this. Because we cannot allow a situation where our people, children and our women are dying in the hands of these criminals. So it means that there should be another strategy. We expect the President to touch on that, to say what is the new strategy that is going to bring about. As African Independent Congress again, we also expect the President now to deal with the issues of the SOEs. We don't know, because this corruption is going on in these SOEs. So we want to know the President and the strategy that is bringing about to curb or to prevent this corruption on the part of these SOEs. SAA, ESCOM, SAPC.
Through whom we govern together.
Plus all those awares. So they should be dealt with thoroughly so that now prevent or curb this corruption. So the President should touch on that. There is this issue of unemployment. Many people lost jobs during the COVID-19. So what other strategy now that is going to be brought about to bring more jobs? So the President should come in and tell us now what is it that is going to do to bring more jobs, because people are suffering. There's a lot of poverty because people are not working. So what is it now, the new strategy that is going to bring about? Yes, we are aware of the new economic strategy plan that the President talked about, but now this should be implemented immediately because people cannot wait. They are no longer prepared to wait anymore. Again, we expect the President now to say what is it that is going to do about the departments that are working serious or so much during this COVID-19, and the departments now that have got that should have more budget than others. I'm talking about Department of Health, Education, Police. Those are departments now that are working very hard. I'm not saying that because they're not working, but now these ones, it's more on their part. So expect the President to say, listen, what is that going to do about this department, because a lot has been done, even by those frontline workers. When we talk of the frontline workers, that's the nurses, doctors, and so on. So we think those people now should at least not be rewarded in terms of increasing their salaries, so that we motivate these people to do more for the country, because they are preventing and they are defending the people from this COVID-19, this beast, this animal that is killing our people. So we expect the President to say more about that.
Die Vryheidsfront Plus se verwagting van die president is dat hy in sy staatsrede baie duidelik moet stel of ons wel hierdie jaar 'n plaaslike regeringsverkiesing gaan hê en of die ANC dalk beplan om vorendag te kom met 'n wysiging van die grondwet en daardeur dan die plaaslike regeringsverkiesing uitstel. Daar moet duidelikheid vir die mense van Suid-Afrika wees. Tweedens, verwag ons dat hy die detail moet uitspel in terme van die inentingsprogram van die COVID-19 enstof. Dit is heeltemal ontstellend as 'n mens nou moet verneem dat die AstraZeneca enstof slegs 22% effektief is. Dit is duidelik dat gesondheid nie sy huiswerk behoorlik gedoen het nie. Derdens verwag ons van die president dat hy ook duidelikheid moet gee in terme van hoe en wat hy presies gaan doen om werksgeleenthede te skep in Suid-Afrika, wat hy gaan doen om die ekonomie te herstel. Ons is moeg om te hoor wat behoort gedoen te word. Ons wil weet wat hy gaan doen. Ons is moeg om te hoor van nog 'n seminar of nog 'n vergadering van besigheidsmense. Ons wil nou die detail hê. Ons wil nou sien dat iets gebeur.
This year's SONA is going to be one of the most important SONAs ever delivered by a president of the Republic of South Africa. South Africa is in a very deep crisis. We're facing a crisis on three fronts: a COVID-19 crisis, an economic crisis, but also a crisis of our democracy. President Ramaphosa is going to have to be unambiguous and specific about how he intends to deal with all of these. He's going to have to account for the vaccine dropping of the ball by his government that is going to cost lives and livelihoods, but also set out very clearly a transparent, accountable plan to which we will be able to hold them accountable over the course of the next year on the vaccine rollout, where they're coming from, when they're getting here, and how they're going to get out there. In terms of the economy, he's going to have to come up with some very bold, brave reforms. The time for talk is now over. The time for the president playing to the gallery in his own party has to come to an end. Without the deep-seated economic reforms, we're not going to transform our economy. We're going to push more people into the periphery, more people are going to lose their jobs, and investment is going to dry up, and we face the very real prospect of having to approach the IMF for a bailout later this year. The president cannot this year talk about bullet trains and fancy cities. He's got to talk about when he's bringing his economic reform agenda to the floor of Parliament so it can be passed, entrenched, and ensured that it is able to fend off the enemies of growth that sit within his party or not. And then, of course, the crisis in our democracy. The president has to tackle head-on cadre deployment, corruption and maladministration, but also the shocking revelations that have come out of the Zondo Commission, and make an account, not only for himself, but also for his party, about their complicity in this situation, which has hollowed out the South African state and left us in a crisis.
SONA 2021 takes place under very difficult conditions, not only for South Africa, but the world over. President Ramaphosa has got a difficult task at hand, having to balance the competing priorities which have been presented by COVID, but also at the same time there is the need for continuity for life in South Africa. The president will have to take the country into confidence about the corrective action that his government is going to take insofar as the blunders about the vaccine are concerned, and we are also calling on the Deputy President David Mabuza to address the nation in his capacity as the chairperson of the Interministerial Committee on the vaccine. President Ramaphosa will have to deal with the issues of economic growth and economic development for the purposes of job creation, and there has to be a particular focus on ensuring that the economy of the country is able to sustain itself well beyond COVID. This means infrastructure development will have to be a key priority of the President's pronouncements, and of course education and healthcare resources, infrastructure and capabilities will have to be improved. Finally, we are calling on President Ramaphosa to deal with the issues of corruption firmly and decisively, as this continues to be a cancer which is robbing South Africans of service delivery. We are in dire straits, we are in difficult moments, it is the worst of times. The president must take the country into confidence, give hope, but also speak to deliverables. He has to walk his talk and ensure that post-COVID South Africa will be able to move forward.
What the Freedom Front Plus expects is that the President in the State of the Nation address brings clarity whether we will have a local government election this year, whether the ANC support an election this year, and whether they will come forward with an amendment to the Constitution to postpone the local government elections. Secondly, we also want to have clarity and the detail of the rollout program of the vaccine in South Africa. It is quite disturbing to learn now that the AstraZeneca vaccine is only 22% effective. What went wrong? And he must explain all the detail. Thirdly, we also want to have clarity and the detail from the President, what he is going to do to ensure that we restore the economy and creating jobs. The people of South Africa is really tired of hearing about another summit and what is wrong and what should be done. We want to hear what he will do to ensure that we create jobs. That is what South Africa needs.
South Africa is skating on very thin ice. Citizens are looking to this year's State of the Nation's address for signs to reassure them that we have the means to avoid plunging through the surface to even colder depths. In an extraordinary year of a pandemic that has crippled an already struggling economy and of continuing revelations of corruption, the most valuable commodity South Africans will be looking for from this year's SONA is hope. Hope that we have the planning and courage in place to emerge in one piece from deep shadows caused by the pandemic on top of the years of mismanagement, unbridled looting, and unfulfilled promises. Pick any SONA over the past dozen years, and you're likely to find reference to addressing electricity failures, the airline with a broken wing, the impotent criminal justice system, the plague of gender-based violence, the gangs of thieves posing as civil servants and public representatives, and the frustrated anticipation of post-apartheid redress with its legacy of grinding poverty. A year ago, in the SONA debate, we said the situation the country was in required less blah blah and more action. We called for a year of implementation, and then COVID hit. Good as an uncomplicated political view of the pandemic, it should not be politicized. While some disaster regulations did not meet citizens' universal approval, the bottom line is that, as a nation, we have largely followed the science. It's a fast-moving foe, and we do well to continue doing so. While certain parties have politicized the disaster by adding to people's anxieties and uncertainties, Good's hope for this year's SONA is for a vision of the new nation that must emerge after the pandemic, perhaps after the implementation of an effective vaccination program, so that good people can begin to lay their foundation.
Very interesting views from different political parties there on their expectations of what the president might address tonight. It is a very somber mood here in Parliament. If you walk outside, you see this is SONA like no other. This is 2021. We are under a very difficult period of the pandemic. And this is reflected on how the proceedings of tonight are running. We are fast approaching the time when the president will step out to deliver his State of the Nation address. And as you may see, today there are no activities like we usually have, where you have the grand parade and all of that. There is no red carpet. The mood is very somber. So what we're going to see tonight, it's the president coming out from the Dane Hayes, walking down to the National Assembly chamber, where he will be delivering his State of the Nation address tonight. But before he walks into the chamber, we are going to see him along with the presiding officers, the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, accompanying him as they stand in front of the foyer to the National Assembly, where they will light candles in honor of all people, all South Africans who have lost their lives to the COVID-19 virus. So that's what we are expecting tonight. But also we have a poet who will be leading the president right into the chamber before he can deliver his address. You will remember last year we had a young girl, Ntombi Mutsonga, who was leading the president in poem, singing praises as he walked into the chamber to deliver the address. So it's quite a lot that we are expecting, but the mood is quite somber, my colleague Temikosi.
The mood is quite somber indeed, Shihla Mariso. And just to update our viewers that as we stand, South Africa has lost over 47,145 lives. And to date, the number of positive cases is 148,000 with a 92% recovery rate, which is at least also a good indication that the number of new infections is declining.
Yeah, and we've seen that number, the number of infections going up and down, reflective of how the economy also has been behaving due to the lockdown restrictions. And I believe we are going to see the president perhaps addressing the economic recovery plan as well in his State of the Nation.
That seems to be a great expectation from most of the people that we spoke to, because they are very much interested on what the president will say in regards to the recovery plan.
Quite interesting indeed. And very soon we will be seeing the president in no time now walking out from the Tain Haze and then marching with the AIDS camp, and we'll be taking you through all of that. Like I said, it's not going to be like any other year where you have the red carpet, where you have all the exciting activities happening. And this year, State of the Nation takes place when Parliament as well has seen members of Parliament losing their lives to this virus that we are faced with as a country. You will see as they march in to the chamber as well, the social distancing will be observed, and we're looking forward to all of that. And we talked, Temikosi, to some of the procedural officers of Parliament earlier on, briefing us on the changes that have taken place to accommodate a hybrid SONA.
Definitely, Shihla Mariso.
And as you can see now, the President of the Republic of South Africa in your screen right now, Mr. Ramaphosa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, led by the AIDS camp from Tain Haze. He arrives at the alignment point at the side entrance of the National Assembly building. The aides de camp march past the receiving party of the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, and their positions we will see very soon behind the Sergeant at Arms, where they will usher in the Black Rod. We see now the Speaker of the National Assembly, Mayor Thandi Modise, leading the President, and right behind the President is the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, and they are about to light the candles in honor of all victims or those who have lost their lives to COVID-19.
There is a flood inside our house. The water climbs the walls when we weep. It does does not let us breathe. Everything is wet with grief. Before this pandemic, we would cast a funeral song into the dark like a flare, and the neighbors would come strengthen our arms as we drove the water out the door. Before grief reached our ankles, before it swept us to our knees, before it flowed into the pots and our beds. To mourn meant a community gathered like a bank between you and the river of death. Now death has dampened this ritual. We mourn alone. The neighbors lift their own arms to relieve the water in their lungs. We are all drowning. This flood has reached into the inner rooms and quenched lives young and old. It has taken what we are not ready to lose. It spits the lives and stories of the living into the street as injured furniture. Like the pensioner, in line for a social grant, whose life makes no space to protest at the beach, still she returns home clothes soaked. Or the man who dies for a beer in his own backyard. The nurse who ties a tattered mask together with prayer and is still unprotected. Or the artist who contemplates whether to eat her own words to ease the hunger, and art starves. This flood ruins all of us. So what of the after? When the depth of this moment is absorbed by history, who will we be? We are a people that know how to rebuild from the remnants of disaster, and we will do it again and again. When we salvage for what is usable, may we find ourselves baptized into something new, with new ways of mourning, and reciting the names of those we have lost, and memories that never sink.
There is South Africans, the national anthem. Something completely different this time around. You'd remember that when that national anthem plays, it's often accompanied by the 21-gun salute. And today, we've seen none of that. As you're looking at your screen, you see that the president is ready to walk into the National Assembly and should be led by the aide-de-camp and followed by the Speaker of the National Assembly.
And as soon as the speaker goes in, and the mace will be carried in to the assembly, then we will be all ready and all set for the president to deliver the State of the Nation. As you can see,